Hello everyone, I'm Revathy Venkatesan and today I'm going to present the review of paper Hey You Get Off My Cloud Exploring Information Leakage in Third-Party Compute Clouds. Let me first talk about the introduction and problem domain in brief. The traditional approach of running servers were hosted and maintained by the individual companies separately, as a result of which data security was never a problem. But when we talk about the current approach, the companies these days prefer to use public clouds for running their servers, as it can be a big money saver in terms of infrastructure and also helps in easy scalability. But problems with this approach is it includes the support of multi-tenancy, that is, multiple users can share the same physical hardware by running the virtual machines on top of it. So now the question arises whether this approach is secure or not, because the attacker can easily penetrate through VMs, stealing the confidential information. This is a very major issue which is discussed in this paper in detail, that how these attacks can be performed, and the author has suggested some mitigation measures to avoid these attacks. So let us move on and talk about the cloud infrastructure that was used at the time of writing this paper. So, domain 0 is a machine that is privileged, or we can say that that has the authorization to manage the guest images. So at the time, as I said, at the time of writing this paper, there were two regions available. One is in US and one is in Europe. And three zones were available in each of the two regions. And there were 5 types of instances that were available: one small, one medium, one large, and two extra large. So each instance is given a pair of external IPv4 address and a domain name, and an internal IPv4 address and a corresponding domain name. So within cloud, both the domains resolved to the same internal IPv4 address, but whereas outside cloud, the external domain name is mapped only to the external IPv4 address for security purposes. Now, let us talk about the tools that were used in carrying out the experiments that are discussed in this paper. The first one is the Nmap. The Nmap, or network mapper, is a security scanner used to discover hosts and services on a computer network, thus creating a map of the network, which is known as cloud cartography. That is, deriving a map of the cloud infrastructure or the instances that are connected is known as cloud cartography. So the Nmap uses three-way handshaking mechanism between the source and target, and by establishing a TCP connection. So next comes the HPing. So what is HPing? HPing is a packet generator and analyzer for TCP/IP protocol. HPing is one of the very important tools for security auditing and testing of firewall networks. It performs trace routes by sending TCP SYN messages with increasing TTL. TTL here is time to live, or we can say the hops, number of hops. The next tool is the wget. wget is a software tool that is used to retrieve web pages, and it supports downloading of these web pages via protocols such as HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. Then the next tool is next comes the external probes and internal probes tool. As the name suggests, the external probes are the ones which originates outside EC2 with the destination inside EC2. and internal probes are the ones that originates inside EC2 with the destination inside EC2 as well. The last tool is the DNS resolution queries. As the name suggests, it is the mapping of domain name with the IP addresses. So this is used to get external name of an instance and internal IP address of an instance. So next, let us talk about the major part of this paper, that is attack implementation. So the major task or difficulties that an attacker has to face is firstly finding out where the target VM is located, and second, be a co-resident with the victim. So the co-residence means the attacker and the victim has to be on the same physical machine in order for the attacker to steal the confidential information. And the third and the last final challenge for the attacker is to figure out the ways to fetch the confidential information from the target. Let me discuss about the first experiment for our VM placement that is discussed in this paper. So the attacker first launches 20 instances, each for zone instance pair. So as I said before, there are 3 zones and 5 instances available. So total number of zone instance pair becomes 15. So the attacker launches 20 instances in each of these 15 pairs, each of these 15 types. And then the attacker keeps on doing whois queries to get the responsive host. So the whois queries is done using the network probing tools such as nmap and hping discussed in the previous slides, and it gets the list of the responsive hosts. And the last step is the DNS lookup, which helps to get the internal IP addresses using the public IP. So since it has the mapping of domain name to the public IP or the internal IP addresses, so we can use this service to fetch the internal IP addresses from the public IP addresses. So it goes like, first the fetch happens of public IP to the domain, and then from domain to internal IP address. So now coming to the observations from these experiments. So after conducting this experiment, the author narrowed the search down to 14,045 unique internal IP addresses out of somewhere around 58,000 IP addresses. And also the internal IP address space is partitioned between 3 zones. As we can see in this picture, the purple area here corresponds to zone 1, the green area here corresponds to zone 2, and the red area here corresponds to zone 3, and we can see that there is a specific set of IP addresses that are assigned to each zone. So the samples or instances from each zone are assigned IP addresses from disjoint portions of the same range. And also the instance types within a zone shows regularity. What I mean by this is, let's go to the next slide. So here we can see that this picture shows the types of instances that are launched from 2 different accounts, that is account B and account A. Here we can see that the number of instances of same type has similar IP addresses. So we can say that the properties of the same type of instances share some kind of regularity. That is what is shown in this particular picture, and that's what it says too, that same instance type corresponds loosely to the similar IP address changes. Now the second task, as I discussed before, was to become co-residents, or determining if the attacker is co-residents with the victim. So how can we determine this? So the author discusses a few steps and carries out another experiment. So in this case, we can compare the DOM0 IP address for each instance. So DOM0 here is the first hop. So every instance, whenever a packet goes out of every instance or lands into in towards an instance, the first hop is the DOM0 IP address. So DOM0 is nothing but domain 0, which I said before that it acts as a privileged virtual machine for managing the guest images. So it is the first hop for every instance. So instances are likely to be co-resident if they have matching DOM0 IP addresses, and also they should have small packet round RTT. RTT is nothing but round trip time. Round trip time is the time since the packet was sent out of the instance, which is a request sent out of the instance, and the time that it receives a reply from the victim. So the time between the request and receiving a reply should be very small. And also it should have both the instances should have numerically close IP addresses, that is within a range of 7. So now the question arises of how to get DOM0 IP address. So as I said, DOM0 is the first hop of every instance. If the instance is in your control, that is you have launched the instance, then it is very easy to get DOM0 IP address, because you can always check the first hop of any packet that is going out of the net out of your instance. So that is easy. But what if you want to determine the target instance DOM0 IP address? So for getting that, you need to use traceroute and send TCP SYN messages and get the last hop, which is the DOM0 IP address of the victim. So a very important note that we need to consider here is same DOM0 would be shared, that is same DOM0 IP would be shared with a contiguous sequence of internal IP address in case of co-resident. That is, if the attacker and the victim becomes co-residents, they would share the same DOM0 IP address, and also they would have the IP addresses allocated to them within in a numerically close numbers, or sometimes it might be contiguous as well. That is what it says. Now let us talk about the steps that the author used in conducting the experiment for determining the co-residence. Firstly, the author created 3 accounts: victim, control, and probe. So the second step is the author launched 2 instances from control account in each of the 3 zones. So the total becomes 6 instances here. And then he launched 20 instances from victim's account. Let us say that each of these instances is A for now, and then he launched 20 instances from probe account. Let us say that each of the instance is B for now. Then we have there is a mapping between A and B. So there are 20 ordered pairs that exist out of these 40 instances launched. Then the author determines DOM0 IP address for each instance in this 40 instances. Then, if matching DOM0 IP address is found, then the A will probe B and all accounts that were launched from the control account. So the instance A, that is the instance launched from the victim's account, will probe instance B, that is the one launched from the probed account, and also A will probe the control instances of all the 6 control instances launched from the control account. So, and the RTT is determined, the round trip time is determined. If it is small, then the author sends a 5-bit message over covert channel. I'll explain what covert channel is in the upcoming slides. So, if the covert channel attack is successful, then that means that the 2 instances are co-resident. So these steps are repeated for 3 different trials and the results are recorded. So the observations that came out as from this experiment is there were 31 pairs of matching DOM0 IP addresses found. So as I said, each instance A will have corresponding probe instance B and vice versa. So for these 31 pairs, there should be some there should be 31 instances from either the probe account or the victim's account. So there we have 62 ordered pairs here, and the median RTT to these pairs were significantly smaller than the control instances. So remember, as I said before, that the author will probe both the instance B as well as the 6 control instances, right? So A and B, the RTT between A and B was very small compared to the RTT between A and the control instances. And 60 out of these 62 pairs, in 60 out of these 62 pairs, 5-bit covert channel attacks were successful, which means that the attacker and the victim were co-resident. So what is a covert channel attack? So in covert channel attack, to send a bit 1, sender instance reads from a random location on a shared disk, and to send a bit 0, the sender does nothing. So the receiver is calculating the reading time frequently, or rather I would say that receiver is constantly calculating the reading time, and the longer read time means 1 being sent, else it's 0. So if 2 instances can communicate over a covert channel or a side channel, then they are said to be co-resident. So now let us talk about the third challenge, or the third task that attacker has to do. That is, he has to place his VM co-resident with the victim, right? So the author conducted the third experiment here for exploiting the VM placements. So there are two placement strategies available. One is brute force placement, where the author launches many instances, or here I would say the attacker launches many instances over a long period of time, and there might be he might get lucky, or there would be coincidence that would make the author to be co-resident with the author, or I would say attacker to be co-resident with the victim. So the success rate for this type of attack is likely for a relatively large data set. That is, the author has to launch a huge number of instances for him to be successful and become co-resident with the victim. So the another approach for the placement is a more refined or intelligent placement approach, where the attacker targets the recently launched instances. So there are some known facts that are there in the cloud infrastructure, that are observed in the cloud infrastructure, I would say. So the first one is the single account never has more than one instance running on the same machine. So if there are 20 instances launched from a single account, the 20 instances would run on different physical machines. And the next fact is related to the locality. So when it comes to sequential locality, that is, if an instance is launched after another instance is terminated, after, or I would say, if the second instance is launched after the first instance is terminated, then and the two instances are launched from the same account, then it is often likely that they are assigned to the same physical machine. The next is the parallel placement locality, where the two instances launched at same time but from different accounts often are assigned to the same machine. That is, if an attacker and a target, if an attacker and the victim launches their own instances, but at the same time, then it might be possible that both of them could land on the same physical machine. That's what is conveyed by the parallel placement locality. Let us move forward and discuss the steps that the attacker used for the that the author used for the VM placement. So first, the attacker figures out the set of potential target victims. Then the attacker infers which of these target maps to particular availability zones and are of particular instance type using cloud cartography. This is what we saw in experiment 1. Then the attacker runs probe instances in the target zone and target type. This is what we saw in experiment 2, wherein he launched 20 instances of each of probe and each from probe and victim account, and also 6 instances were launched from the control account, and he used network probing strategies. That is what is conducted in experiment 2, and that's what he does as in this step. And then each probe instance checks if it's co-resident to any of the target. If not, the instance is terminated. Now the question arises, how can we use more refined intelligent placement strategy here? So there is a fact that servers are run only when needed and stopped when instances are terminated. So this is the information that the author takes advantage of to place his VM. So the attacker can monitor the server state by network probing continuously. And then once he realizes that the victim's instance disappears and then it reappears again, once it reappears, the attacker can flood running n instances in parallel. So as we talked in parallel placement strategies, when two instances are launched from different account but at the same time they tend to land on same physical machine. So that's what attacker does here. Whenever he sees the victim's instance reappears, he launches his instance in parallel, and there is high chance that attacker and the victim can be on same physical machine. So as I said, this uses the parallel placement locality. Now, the observations from these experiments. So the naive brute force strategy achieves a success rate of 8.4%, and on the other hand, the more intelligent placement using the parallel placement locality achieves a success rate of 40%, which is huge when it comes to data insecurity. Now, we all would be wondering, what are the consequences of these attacks? So the very evident consequence of this attack is the author can easily penetrate through the VM, and using the covert channel or side channel attacks, he can steal the confidential information, which is known as information leakage. This is one of the very evident consequence of the attacks. But what other attacks that co-residency uh, is it can make is one first one is denial of service attack, the DOS attack. And then the attacker can estimate the victim's workload, that is the victim's cache usage, the victim's network traffic. These kind of things can be monitored by the attacker. And then the attacker can also extract the cryptographic keys by using cache-based side channels, which is a very major threat and needs to be needs a consideration. Um, and then there are other cross VMs attacks possible. So, talking about the mitigation measures that are discussed in the paper by the author. So, the author first says that the cloud providers should obfuscate both the internal structure of their service and the placement policies. By this, the author means that cloud providers should set DOM 0 not to respond in trace routes. Like they can just choose not to display the DOM 0 IP address in their trace routes. By doing this, it will be even more complex task for the attacker to figure out if they have the matching DOM 0 IP addresses or not, which is a key factor in determining the co-residency. Then the author says that providers should also assign internal IP addresses randomly. Like we saw that same type of instances launched by two different accounts in the same zone tends to have similar IP address ranges. This could be done as a random process, which would eliminate the possibility of attacker determining the co-residency. And also the provider should use VLANs to isolate the accounts. So the author also suggests that providers should focus on minimizing the information leakage by blinding all possible side channels. That is, they should close all possible side channels which can lead to information leakage. That is one of the other mitigation measures that the author suggests. And the third measure that the author suggests is to stop giving authorization to users to choose their VM placements, rather appoint some authorized persons or admins to do these VM placements. That is one of the other measures. The last and most important, or the foolproof measure that the author suggests, is the users, or here the companies, should consider you choosing the physical machine to be populated only with their VMs, and in turn bear the expense of underutilized machines. So by this, author means that the company should buy the physical machine as a whole, rather than just getting a part, or out of 4 cores in the machine, just getting 2 cores to launch one of the instances, then remaining 2 cores would be assigned to some other user. Rather than doing this, the company can pay for the remaining 2 cores as well, although it might not be used. But instead of having data insecurity problems, they could pay a little bit extra and get the whole physical machine, which will eliminate the problem of being co-resident or being attacked completely. Coming last is the conclusions that are discussed So the author has successfully demonstrated the following here. Public clouds can be mapped using network probing tools. We saw in experiment 1. The possibility of targeted co-residency, that's what we saw in experiment 2 and 3. And then the possible security threats once an attacker becomes co-resident with the victim, the consequences of the attack we saw. And then the last is the mitigation measures that the author suggests can be adopted to ensure or we can say avoid these kind of attacks. So these are the conclusions that comes out of this paper. Thank you.